never thought we could get so low, and now I'm letting you go, and I'm blaming you for everything. These are the ones that I need you to know. The truth is starting to show. Why I'm blaming you for everything. start playing with fire, everyone burns in the end. Siamese, I know your name. Don't hide from me, 'cause I see all your pain. It's written in your eyes. You and I, we are one and the same. For better or for worse, our dreams are our curse. We are united in our pain. So tell me why we live like angels with no halos, walking blind. left by the sun at the dawn. Know that I had a demon for lunch.
All right, folks, welcome to YouTube land. I'm going to make my first foray into podcasts tonight. As you can see on the banner, it's Rating with Class is the title we've chosen for this series. This is podcast number 1, titled Raid Lead. So I think that is appropriate for the folks that we're going to talk about raiding with tonight. We're gonna have Abram and Imtar. Abram is from Risen on the Alliance side. Imtar is from the After Party on the Horde side. Both Ashkandi. That's our home server, home realm, if you will. And I thought it would be a great idea after talking to these two. I've spent a few sessions of just listening to these two banter back and forth, and I got to tell you, you can just sit back and not even say a word and let them go at it, and it's just a learning experience. It's interesting. So I said, you know what? We got to get some debates going and get them down on paper and on the YouTube spheres for you guys. So that's what we're doing. Tonight is our first in this series. We will adjust as we go, learn as we go, get better as we go, and maybe figure out this podcasting thing. Yeah, Christopher, me not say a word. So with that in mind, I don't know if Abram's back, so we're gonna let Imtar. I was gonna go alphabetically, but you know what?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're munching, so we're gonna go reverse order. We're gonna let Imtar go first. Imtar, give us you. Tell us about you. Tell us what you bring to the table.
Okay. Well, I'm Imtar. I'm the raid leader for the Tuesday-Thursday raid team for the after party. I'm also the main tank of that group, and I've been raid leading for that team since about February. So it'll be about 5 months so far. However, like I've played the game much longer than that. I actually started playing the game in vanilla all the way back around the ZG patch. I remember being around like level 20 or 30 of the time of the Blood Plague is always how I kind of timestamp it. And I played the game through. I've played the game all the way through up until Warlords of Draenor, where I quit before the expansion hit. I came back for Legion, and then I left again for Battle for Azeroth, and I thought I was kind of done. And then Classic came out, and I figured, hey, I've got some nice memories. I'm going to come back and, laugh for a couple of days because I know that the game was a horribly designed Frankensteinian mess. And I was going to enjoy myself for a week or two and then leave, and I haven't left yet.
Yeah, they just won't let you go.
No, there's, been having a blast here. And like I said, I've been raid leading for the better part of most of my experience. I've been a guild master through 4 of those expansions, and now I'm one of the leadership in the after party, and we're having a good time here.
Absolutely. After Party is definitely the premier raiding guild on the Horde side, Ashkandi. I think the same can be said for Risen there, Abram. Your turn, buddy. In the middle of eating food, why don't you go ahead and tell us all about your background?
No, you're good. You're good. So, first off, for the Alliance, obviously, I am Abram. I play a human Fury Prot warrior, Fury Prot shill, and I actually came to Ashkandi late. I didn't start on this server. I started on a different server. And then some friends were like, "Oh, you should come play with us," and so I did. And they have since quit the game, and I'm still here. I actually started as just kind of a pug for hire kind of tank on the server. I started playing with Alt Raiders, which was a guild of some alts of Nova, which at the time was the best guild on the server. And after enough time, we kind of all joined together in a new guild, Risen. And that was back in like October of last year. And then gradually over time, I just started, working my way up. And now I am the guild master of Risen. And I can brag that we had the server first BWL kills and everything. But After Party, of course, was very close behind us.
We have a couple of them from you.
You have one. You have Razor Door.
That's not 0.
You have Razor Door. We tied on Veil, but I will also say, Banner, you'll appreciate this. Being a military person yourself, we had it was 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock release, and at 5:55, I was still in formation.
Oh shit!
So that was a rather hasty ride home. But
right.
So we got a late start on raid, but hey, it worked out.
Nice. Tell us some more of your background. Did you play vanilla, Abram, at all?
Yeah. So I actually did. I was oh gosh, I was 9, I think, when I started playing WoW. So a lot of vanilla for me was like, I was too young to actually participate in anything meaningful. Burning Crusade, I was I mean, I played during Burning Crusade, right? But I would still say that I was casual. And then Wrath of the Lich King is really when I started to like get to the point where I was raid leading for a guild. I was participating in other things and like taking the game more seriously. And then during like cat. Oh my gosh.
you got to make sure you put that down the right hole there, Abram. Holy crap.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, don't choke on stream.
Holy crap, I'm
So,
gonna have to cut that out.
That's funny. No, during like Kata and Mop times, that's when I was in like a US top 100 guild at the time, and so I was playing the game a little bit more seriously then. And then after Pandaria, I was just sort of on and off until I heard about Classic release, and obviously, I think like a lot of people, I was too young or too inexperienced to really play the game at the level that I would have wanted to, but
So, well, let me ask you this, because I know that Imtar and I are a little bit more aged. Let's say that. How much time did your folks play, Abram?
my whole family plays actually. My brother's still
Okay.
raising me. He's a couple years older than me. My dad's actually in my guild in Risen. He doesn't raid on our main team with us, but he's on the alt team with us. And my mom occasionally will play too. She's a little busier, but she's
Well,
not retired.
So what I'm trying to get to here, the question I'm really trying to ask is, how much fishing did you have to do back in vanilla for your folks? That's what I'm trying to get to.
No, I'll tell a quick story before we get into too much else. My dad really loves doing daily quests, and I, being the like preoccupied 12, 13-year-old, hated the daily quest grind.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad would log into my account after I had gone to school and do the daily quests on my account because he had run out of characters on his account.
Oh, wow.
To do daily quests. And I came home one day to an epic mount, and I was like, "Oh, Dad, you loaned me money." He goes, "Nope, that's money I saved up from doing your daily quests."
Right? It just forgot to trade it back to your tune. Yep.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, thanks."
Right. Okay, well, so as you can see, we've got a varied background, but definitely a very credible background from both of our raid leaders, GMs here. And that's what we want, right? We want to learn from these guys. With that in mind, I think we'll continue with Imtar going first since Abram lost his place in line going to the Chow. So Imtar, and I told these guys right before the stream, so they're kind of on the spot a little bit. I want to know, regardless of raid, what your perfect raid comp is for 40-man that you would want to go into any specific raid, knowing that you could handle it. Let's not even worry about gear or if they're. Let's just go with a 40-man that if they execute, they can beat the bosses. They can go 10 for 10 or whatever. Go.
That's.
I know it's a tough one.
Well, it's kind of there's a construct in there that kind of matters about like regardless of what you're fighting, and what you're fighting really matters, because like even in the after party we have a different composition on our standard teams versus our speed runs versus our progression teams.
Mm-hmm.
Like we vary it up all the time.
Yep.
Like as a comp that can beat just about anything in classic,
Mhm.
honestly, if you have like a standard distribution of classes, like you're talking about, I like to run 3 tanks. I know the general consensus is about 2, but I like 3. We go a little bit heavy on the melee, so a split of about, in total, there's about 15 melee between the rogues and the warriors. You want to run 5 to 6 shaman. We usually actually 11 heal. I know that's pretty uncommon. 10 healing is pretty common as well for us as well. And then we'll run the rest of it as casters, which typically means between 6 and 8 mages and about 3 warlocks.
Okay. Then
And that's a composition that like it can handle pretty much anything you throw at it.
might struggle a little bit here and there because of the boss, right? But it would still be doable. Is that kind of what you're saying?
It's less about struggling because of the boss, because that comp can handle any boss, and
Okay.
it's more about like, are you trying to push for a speed clear?
Right.
Because like if you're trying, because like as an example, there are like in classic, until AQ hits and the mages go fire, in which case it kind of depends on who you ask. We'll see how good fire mages turn out to be. I'm very hopeful, but for the moment at least, the melee just drive the damage meters right now. And if you have enough melee that know what they're doing and you stack your melee, you can actually ignore some mechanics. A simple example is I don't think I've seen Shazreth do her teleport mechanic in several months because we kill Shazreth so fast that it never gets a chance to teleport. Whereas if I'm running a more balanced comp, the DPS is going to be a bit lower, and therefore I'm like that's something you are going to have to adjust your strategy around.
Okay.
Similarly, like Major Domo is another example where we actually do a strategy where like we don't mess around with sheeps or kiting the ads. We actually just have the tanks run in. We do the AoE taunt, and we AoE everything down in one big pile. And that's again a strategy that like if you have a stacked raid can do just fine, but I would never recommend it unless your raid is, stacked for it.
Gotcha. So just for the folks that, are new to the game or new to raiding or even raid leading, define your 3 tanks. I'm going to make the assumption just because I feel like I know. That's going to be 3 warriors, right?
We have one team that runs 3 warriors, but actually 2 of our teams run 2 warriors and a bear.
Okay.
And that's kind of interesting where like there are overall like I mean like some druids would disagree, but overall warriors just have better tools for tanking. They have like even the simple stuff like the ability to drink potions during a fight is something that druids do not have. They have the AoE taunt, and there's other mechanics that that just like play out in the warrior's favor that I'll just say exist and leave that for another podcast. But the druid also like does bring some advantages to the raid in the form of like exceptionally high armor values and health pools.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some mechanics where they are just super valuable for having that.
Yep, I'll give you that. So would you are your 3 tanks then for you with the 3 warriors, 2 mitts and a threat, or does it even matter to you guys at that point?
What we run is a 2 threats and a mitt actually.
Okay. All right. So I think that gives us a little bit, and we have a cool. What was the shaman count again for you on your perfect raid comp?
We run 5 to 6 shamans.
Okay, all right, there we go. And for those that are watching, guys, once I actually get this final cut, we'll throw up the actual stats in the video once it's cleared to YouTube. So we're not going to do the stats live, but I'll go ahead and throw it up in the video. Oh, all right, Abram, let's transition to you, man. What does the Alliance do?
Ha 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 ha. Now I get disprove and discredit all of the terrible Horde nonsense he's now pushed into your head. Now, so I'll talk in kind of reverse order of the way that Imtar did it, just so specifically he brought up tanks. You know me, I tank. Imtar tanks. We're partial to tanking.
Yep.
I would definitely agree with his statement on, so for Alliance, I'm looking at it kind of the same way as far as like, what are the minimums I need to hit in each category? And then beyond that, like filling the excess, what is optimal or what is ideal or what, is situationally good. So from a tanking perspective, yeah, I like to have 3 dedicated tanks. We actually, in our main raid, we do exactly what Imtar does, right? We have 2 tanks that focus on threat and 1 that focuses on mitigation. Now, I personally have found in Classic so far that you don't really need a mitigation focused tank. Like Fury Prot, for the most part, does fine in just about every scenario. Things like Chromagus Enrage or Nefarian Class Call that in the past people thought were, disqualifying factors
Mhm.
to
Now
dual
tease
wield
that
tank.
though. Don't give up all the
I
information
know,
for
I
our
know, I know.
warrior.
I'm just saying, like, hey,
Okay, all right.
some of those things that they thought were disqualifying turned out to not be disqualifying. So,
Yeah.
for us, we just have a tank that likes to play the more mitigation mindset, and I don't feel like it hampers us to do so. So, that's sort of the enabler there. So I'm looking at like 3 tanks. Then the next thing from there is I'm looking at healers. Now, obviously, I don't have use of shaman. But we do have a pretty nifty thing in paladins. So the question becomes, well, how many paladins do you want to take? And as everybody knows, paladin, or maybe they don't. Paladins provide some pretty powerful buffs to the raid as a whole, and to optimize that and make sure that everybody's getting like all of the paladin buffs that they need. For example, take a warrior is going to want might buff and king's buff, and then also salve if they're DPS or if they're tanking light. So 3 paladins there. If you're a caster, again, you're going to want king's, wisdom, probably salve. One of our resto druids would tell you definitely salve. So uh, you look at that, 3 paladins is basically where you end up with. Now, that doesn't have to be Holy Paladin. If you want to flex a little bit, throw your Ret Paladin in there. That's totally acceptable. It's not, a Ret Paladin gets memed on a lot, and yeah, it's not the best DPS, but it's, if you have a player that you really like, that likes playing that way, that contributes well to your guild, that's not a disqualifying factor for your raid to be successful at all. One of our raid teams that does extremely successful has used a Ret Pally since the dawn of time. Shout out to Aurelio. So I'm looking at 3 tanks, probably warriors, but again, like Imtar said, you can use a bear for 1, 2, 3 paladin, and 1 resto druid. Again, because improved Mark of the Wild is the buff that you really want to pick up from a druid, and typically you get that in a resto build that you wouldn't expect from a standard feral or a standard boomkin build. So at that point, you have 4 healers. The rest of your healers can be priests, they can be paladin, they can be druids. I tend to like priests. I think priests are the most like versatile healers in the game. There's certainly people that might disagree, but I think overall, like, bang for your buck, priest. So let's say you want at least 9 healers. I know Mtar said he runs 11. I've run 9 before. I think that 9 is sort of like, again, your cutoff. So if we're saying 3 pallies, 1 resto druid, let's go 5 priests then. And then plus you can spread those priests out, right? They can prayer of heal and provide you a lot of utility. And then switching to the DPS, for kind of the same reason that you want 3 pallies, they provide blessings. You want 3 warlocks in the curses they provide. Curse of Recklessness for the armor reduction, Curse of Shadows for the warlocks, and a Shadow Priest if you want a Shadow Priest, which I'll touch on in a second. And then Mage, they're going to benefit from Curse of Elements. So you get your 3 warlocks at least to pick up those curses. And then the thing I teased just a second ago about Shadow Priest, right? Shadow Priest provide a debuff that increases the shadow damage that a mob will take by up to 15%, which plays mutually with the warlocks.
Yep.
Hunters, 2 to 3 hunters maybe for Trank Shot. That's usually like the reason that you have to have a hunter in the group for Trank Shot. That's just like a mandatory requirement on a lot of bosses. Mages, I like 4 or 5 at least 4, maybe 5. And again, some are playing like Winter's Chill to help the other mages out, but then when everybody goes to fire, right, you don't have to do Winter's Chill anymore because you don't need that extra frost damage debuff. So And then the rest you fill with rogues and warriors. So like ideal comp, let's say 3 warriors to tank. We'll say 1 resto druid, 3 pallies. We're feeling aggressive today, so we'll do 5 priests and go with 9 healers. We'll do 4 warlocks because there's that 1 warlock that you really like hanging out with. There's like 5 mages, 3 hunters, and then that leaves you room for like 5-6 fury warriors, 4-5 rogues, and it doesn't have to be that way, certainly. I like to have the extra fury warriors because then, especially on fights like Scarum or something where you need extra tanks, a fury warrior is just a more useful melee DPS to you than rogues. And that's
Gotcha.
really the name of the game with WoW raids, is like, and your raid comps, is flexibility. You want everybody in your raid to not only fill a purpose, but also have the option to kind of like flex a little bit and fill another purpose, right? So
Right.
the more not to like totally get into a druid conversation, but like there's a druid build, for example, that will allow you to tank pretty decently, off tank on a lot of fights, and also be a healer depending on what gear that you use. And like that is so much more flexible for the raid for 99% of guilds that aren't like trying to optimally speed run,
Right.
than running just another warrior or another healer, because it just gives you options. So players that are flexible in multiple roles, or flexible on, maybe they have multiple classes that they have 60 and that are geared that can swap in and out, those people are always going to be more useful to you.
Yep. Hey, let me pop back over to Imtar here real quick. Imtar, well, there's a question in the stream. I'll let you address this one, and then I have a follow-on. Boomkins. Any place for Boomkins on the Horde side there for you?
I would say that like it is not disqualifying to bring a boomkin to your raid. But like if you want to be a contributing member of your raid, then no. I mean, like, I know people like enjoy playing their boomkins for I don't know what reason, but
Well, I mean, they do get chicken for them. I mean, there is that. But anyway, sorry.
right, like people enjoy the chicken form. The problem is that just like, you know, the math behind boomkins just does not support bringing them, because there's just not enough damage output and not enough mana.
Right.
Like I remember hearing a while back there was a 40 boomkin raid that tried molten core, and got they actually cleared molten core the second time they did it when they had many more cats than they had boomkin. The first time, like, the boomkin struggled to kill any single boss because they would all before the boss was at half health.
Gotcha.
Like, I mean, they're useful for a crit. The crit buff that they bring is useful, but 3% crit across an entire mage group is going to increase the mage's DPS, but not as much as bringing another actual mage would.
Right. Yeah, and that's Crit Aura just got brought. I don't know if you guys actually have the YouTubes up, but yeah, Crit Aura for the Warlock group was brought up. All right, so now
Right. Like, generally speaking, though, like, I do agree with everything Abram said. The only difference is that, like, and again, this ties into why the Horde runs so many shaman, is that Wind Fury is just such a powerful buff for your melee
yeah,
that it makes, like, we can get so much more. That's just so powerful for what the warriors can do.
well,
I do also agree with the point about flexibility.
yeah,
And that's part of the reason, like, one of the reasons Fury Prot is so good is that, like, you can be Fury Prot and take overall, like, a very minor hit to how much damage you deal relative to a Fury Warrior.
got it. Now, so you did segue though, because that was my follow-on question for you, Imtar, was shaman comp. What, how many enhance, if any? Is it just the one enhance rule? Tell me about the shaman piece.
So for the shamans, we actually run all resto. I actually have run an enhanced shaman, and I've ran it with the progression group in our guild, and like I actually have come to the conclusion that like I would not bring my own enhancement shaman to a raid anymore, just because like the amount of damage they provide, like the amount of damage they provide is fine. They can do, you know, like they can provide a reasonable amount of damage until you start thinking in terms of like what is there's an economic term for the replacement cost of like I could have this or I could have this instead. And an enhancement shaman versus like just making one of your healers a resto and bringing an additional melee, the melee is going to bring more to the raid. That being said, like it's really close in terms of enhancement. There would be nothing wrong with having like one enhancement shaman in the raid, especially because that unlocks totem twisting, which is a technique specifically around like the air totem. What you can do is you can drop the Wind Fury totem. That places a 10-second buff of the Wind Fury effect on your melee or on their weapon, and then you don't actually. And then what you do is immediately after you place another totem, either threat reduction totem, the Grace of Air, or or I'm sorry, Tranquil Air, or Grace of Air, which is an agi boost, which is going to increase damage and also do dodge if you're in the tank group. And those are actually like that's very useful, but that's going to drain your enhancement shaman's mana really hard, and the other and they get a non-trivial portion of their overall damage output from using their shocks. And the shock spells that the enhancement have are actually very expensive for what they do, and they're on a 6-second cooldown, so they're used pretty regularly. Which means that an enhancement shaman, unless you're willing to invest in a distilled wisdom flask for 2,000 extra mana, you're going to drive yourself out of mana once again pretty quickly.
Got it.
So, like, enhancement shaman actually do have a place in the raid. I would not recommend bringing more than one of them though if you're trying to optimize your composition. But again, just about any composition of reasonable distribution can clear content nowadays.
Gotcha.
Enhancement gets a little funny, or elemental is where things actually get a little funnier, because elemental brings actually pretty decent damage. The problem is, once again, they run into mana trouble, because if you're trying to push more damage out of them with their shocks, they will once again, drive themselves out of mana. They have actually fewer options to restore their mana. And the other issue that gets complicating is that, and this comes up especially into Encourage, a lot of bosses end up having nature resistance. Like Gar is an example. Any kind of elemental tends to have default nature resistance built in. So you're actually doing only a portion of your true damage or your true damage potential. Around Encourage, that gets both better and worse, because it gets worse in the sense that there are a number of bosses in Encourage, being such like a nature themed instance, that have elevated nature resistance, which is going to be a problem. But also around Encourage is when gear starts dropping that you can use that actually reduces your target's nature resistance. Having a Thunder Fury in the raid also places a debuff on the boss that reduces nature resistance.
Wow, you
by
just
25.
did somebody say Thunder Fury?
Somebody did say Thunder Fury.
Holy crap!
But ultimately, like, elemental is again one of those classes where it's not going to hurt you to bring one of them, but like they're just not strong enough in comparison to other classes to really be like the mainstay of your raid.
Gotcha.
So like generally speaking, like Chain Heal is such a ridiculously powerful heal.
Yeah.
In comparison to what the other two classes bring, that you really want Shaman in your raid. Like, for anyone who's not familiar with it, you filthy Alliance dogs, Chain Heal is just a fantastic raid heal spell, because you cast it on the main target, but then the game will actually, as soon as you cast it, it'll bounce to 2 other targets, and the game will automatically detect who in range has the lowest health
Right.
and do the bouncing.
Right.
And so like even if like a lot of healers experience like they're casting a spell and damage comes out on someone else while they're in mid cast with chain heal automatically corrects for that.
Yep.
And it has a very low overhealing rate.
Yep.
So it's just a fantastic raid heal spell.
By definition, it's not really gonna overheal. All right, let me give Abram a chance to rebut here. Not really a rebut. I have a redirect for you, Abram.
Sure.
At two-parter. First, how do you compensate on the Alliance side for that lack of chain heal with your healing core? Is it just the prayer of or what's the heal, the group heal?
Yeah, chain heal. Okay, before you ask me that, Banner, I'm
Yes,
gonna
sir.
give you the 2-minute reason why you need a boom cannon. Okay.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
This is not a want. This is a need. All right, you ready for it?
Bonus content. Yes, let's get it.
Hello, mages. Look at your buffs. Now back to me. Now back to your buffs. Now back to me. Sadly, you're not me. But if you got a moonkin in your group, you could crit like you're me. Look down. Now back up. Where are you? You're at the top of the leaderboards on Warcraft logs. With the boomkin, your mage could crit like. What's in your hand? Neltharion tier. You won for being such a great player. Look down. Back up. That Nelth tier is now a Staff of the Shadow Flame. Anything is possible when you have a boomkin in your group. I'm getting battle rezzed.
Yeah, but a Staff of the Shadow Flame is second BIS next to one hand and
that
I'm
just
sorry.
that just happened.
That was
was
fantastic.
beautiful. That was freaking. How long you been practicing that, Abram? Holy
How
shit!
long have you had that ready to go?
Right?
Ah!
I had that in your pocket. All right, part.
Always there at the hip, ready to shoot.
All right, part.
Okay, so
I will yield the point, sir.
We're gonna have to clip that out at some point for sure and put it up
Boomkin
somewhere.
OP, you gotta have one. Try it out. Your mage is 11. You don't even know how good it is.
All right, on the points meter, dude, you just scored. Yeah, you just moved over on the points meter from the YouTube audience. I can tell you that.
So my thing with chain heal and how we compensate for a lack of chain heal. So this is actually a really interesting difference in Horde and Alliance. You would think that with Paladin and Shaman being different, that like the healing differences would come down to how those classes play. But actually, the way that the healing comes down is the difference in how priests end up playing.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, I know I've already struck a nerve with Imtar. So for Horde, you have Shaman and priests and druids that are available. Well, druids are kind of by default already a utility healer and a raid healer. And your shamans, because of chain heal, provide a really great boost to your overall raid healing. Now, you have one of those shaman that can focus on tank healing. They have an ancestral fortitude armor buff that they put on people. So you can have like one of those shamans specifically on tank healing, but for the most part, your shaman are focused on raid healing, which with the druid, now you've got an overload of raid healing. So your priests are covering down and tank healing. Whereas on Alliance side, you have this wonderful tank healing machine called a Holy Paladin. So your Holy Paladins are your tank healers, and then your Resto Druid and your priests are actually raid healing. So the play style is almost completely different to be a raid healer as a priest on Horde side versus on Alliance side. On Horde side, you're almost always tank healing as a priest. On Alliance side, you're almost always raid healing as a priest. So to compensate for the lack of chain heal, split the priests up. Prayer of healing is usually the answer. I know in some of our speed runs, we'll stack all the priests in one group to maximize like raid like group buffs, and then as a result, your priests are just kind of like flash heal go burr. But
well, you just nullified my follow-up question, Abram.
Yes, sorry.
Go ahead,
If I
Imtar.
can comment real quick though, that's actually you're correct that like the difference in priests is probably like what shamans versus paladins do to like priest roles is probably the most interesting difference between healing. But something I would also throw out there is actually like generally speaking, you don't actually want your shamans on tank healing because they're fine tank healers, but they also have a important buff for when they're tank healing called Healing Way, which when you cast Healing Wave, which is your primary heal onto the tank, it applies a stacking buff that increases the healing provided by other healing waves by 6%, stacking up to 3 times for 18. The issue, though, is like that sounds really awesome, but the issue that actually runs into is your tank is going to be up against the buff cap. So, because there's a maximum amount of buffs that a player can have, and if your tank has too many, they're going to start losing their world buffs, which is going to be a big deal for how much threat they can put out. So, while you're under world buffs, and in general, you actually don't want your shamans tank healing because the druid and the priest are like can do the same amount of healing without placing the additional buff on them. We actually run, I don't know if it's popular over on the Alliance, but there's 2 real specs that your druids are going to run as healers, and that's either going to be the deep regrowth build, which is a strong build. But the other build that's really interesting is the Moonglow Druid build, which makes them which turns your druid into like a main tank healing machine.
We lost you for a second there, Imtar, but you're saying the Moonglow build that's like healing touch, down rank spam on the tank, yeah?
Yeah, because what it does is it makes your healing touch cast faster and also notably cheaper.
Yep.
So it actually turns your druids into kind of like the main tank healing machine that the Alliance Paladin occupies. And similarly, the priests bring the armor buff to the tanks as well.
Yep.
So your druids and your paladins your druids and your priests on Horde side, exactly as Abram said, are going to end up being like your primary tank healers, and chain heal is going to be, your the big doing a lot of the work on raid healing, but like your the priests also end up kind of being like the swing healer as well, just because of what they do for dispels. Like priests are the only class Horde side that can dispel magic debuffs.
Yep.
Whereas the Alliance have paladins for that.
Yeah.
So you need to bring them there. You also need to actually not assign some of your paladins to your tank, because if you've got paladins assigned to your main tanks and there's a lot of dispelling that needs to happen, you've put them in a position where they need to choose between doing dispels on the raid or healing the tank.
You said paladins, but you meant priests.
You meant priests.
Yeah, I knew what you meant. Yeah,
so did I.
I apologize.
So Abram, I just had this discussion.
He just wants to be Alliance so bad.
He does,
like paladins
right?
in his mind.
He's Freudian slipping constantly. Freudian slips constantly. No, Abram, we were just having a discussion, or I was, with a couple of our priests that I hang out with, one in guild and one not. And we mistakenly assigned them to tank heals with druids in the group and paladin in the group for a ZG run, and I got a short, quick lesson on please don't make me a tank healer. You just cut out half of my ability to heal. So I'm with you on that, but you did really answer my follow-up, and that was going to be my priest question. And you answered it for me, which is great. I mean, I didn't even have to ask the damn question. So yeah, I feel like there's commonality there. Your bestest priests, let's say, you probably don't want to pigeonhole them into a tank healing slot, right? Yeah, you want them to be able to spot heal, raid heal, etc. Go ahead.
Yeah, and well, touching on Imtar's point of we run two resto druids in our main group, and they do exactly what Imtar said. They both run the different specs. Like one is the deep regrowth spec, the other is the healing touch spec. And I mean, having two regrowth druids in the group's kind of a waste because they're just going to overlap on each other. But especially with like what am I saying? Especially with Alliance, you take a lot more. Healers do so much for your group, right? Like Imtar was saying, they dispel, they heal, they do like it's not just one thing that they're going to do for you. on Horde side, right? Like Shaman, Druid can both. That's the majority of your heals, and they can both cleanse poison. On Alliance side, you get Paladins and Druids, and those are your only poison cleanse. So I like having an extra Druid, especially with the prospect of AQ coming out here soon. Like 2 Druids, that's another poison cleanse for some of these fights where there's just so much poison to cleanse that a priest heavy group isn't able to keep up with as well, especially when all of your pallies are furiously spamming on the tanks that are too stubborn to put shields on.
So what's a poison?
Right, exactly. Poison cleanse totem OP. But
Yeah.
I mean, you would look at us and you'd say, salve. So like there
Yeah.
are and Banner, I saw you typed in the like chat about Fear Ward. That's a non-negligible difference. That is a huge difference,
Right.
especially now that they have fixed the aggro on Nefarian and Ani that
that actually is like a big difference between classic and vanilla itself, because like part of the reason that like if you look at a lot of like population metrics, you'll see at early in the game there were a ton of on Alliance side dwarf priests, specifically because of Fear Ward and how important that was. And the reason that was is there were multiple bosses that had a fear mechanic. And in the original vanilla, like this is not a bug. In the original vanilla, when your tank got feared, anyone who was feared, the boss did not target them. They targeted the next highest aggro. So you would get your tank feared, and then the boss would turn and start wrecking the rest of your raid.
Got it.
Whereas, like in Classic, that's not how fears work. But lately, it seems like they're like they're like fixing that historical inaccuracy.
Yeah, you can go and check the patch notes. They specifically pointed out, they were like, oops, one of the pivotal mechanics that made Onyxia and Nefarian way harder than they are now. Like, oopsie whoopsie, we left that out. So
Hashtag no changes. Hashtag no changes.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So like if you're Alliance, you probably haven't even noticed that change happened because you're so used to having a dwarf priest and a Fear Ward. And I would venture to say that for a lot of Horde guilds that aren't, like stellar, and by that I mean that, are not like 30-minute clear BWL type guilds, like a lot of 1 hour, hour and a half, 2-hour guilds in BWL, like they probably struggled on patch day with that change to Nefarian, especially if it lines, like you have Tremor Totem, right? But it's not like retail where you can drop Tremor Totem while you're feared. So you drop the Tremor Totem like while you see the ground rumblies before he fears, and hopefully it ticks.
Yeah,
in a prompt time.
Like that is an important difference because like for the Alliance Fear Ward, like the Fear Ward gets removed, but it just counters the fear, and it's like the fear never happened.
Right.
Whereas on the Horde side,
it's got a tick.
With Tremor Totem, it's got a tick.
Yep.
So the fear still gets applied, which means that unless you get exceptionally lucky and the tick just happens to line up with the cast, the tick only goes off every couple seconds.
Yep.
So that's still a few seconds where you better hope Neff isn't in the middle of a Shadow Flame breath.
Yeah, I was about to say, I like so many times when I was doing, because I played on, I didn't really mention this in the introduction, but like, this is the first time I've ever played Alliance, right? Like seriously, played Alliance. I've always been Horde before this. So in all my private server experience where I was doing BWL, it was Horde, and that was a huge part of the Nefarian encounter, was just like, can your tank, Magmadar too, can your tank manage his stance dancing to go berserker rage?
And for anyone who's not familiar with that, stance dancing is a term for a specific technique that warrior tanks use, and it's another one of those reasons that like warriors are the premier tank in Classic, is that warriors have an ability, Berserker Rage, on a 30-second cooldown, gives them 10 seconds of immunity to fear, among a few other benefits. But it's only available in Berserker stance, which means that your tank has to leave defensive stance, which is what they're tanking in, hit that ability and then go back to Berserker stance.
And they've got to do it
And
quickly.
it's a real skill that like your tank has to develop
Yep.
to deal with fear in order to like anticipate or in reaction to like Neff's cast bar,
Yep.
you know, get that ability up right away to counter it.
Yeah, Magmadar is the same way. Onyxia is the same way.
Yep.
And like specifically on Nefarian, sometimes you can get so many fears that you know that you can't. It doesn't fall within that 30-second cooldown window. So I know a viable strategy that like a lot of guilds used before even the meta was there of you know, every tank is Fury Prot. There existed a meta where you would have one tank specifically with Death Wish in their build to be your Nefarian tank, so that they could fill the gaps in Berserker Rage uptime with the Death Wish.
And that makes sense in Imtar yet again. So you pulled another. You answered my question that I was going to ask as a follow-up. So that is kind of how you're going to offset not having Fear Ward. You explained it extremely well, but it still comes down to RNG for you. So it's not, it's effectively an RNG, which kind of sucks, but I mean, that's the cards you're dealt, right?
Well, it's not entirely RNG because because we do have deadly boss mods and we do have plenty of add-ons that give you boss timers, and the bosses do not cast those abilities exactly on those timers all of the time, but there is a minimum time between them. And when you tank them long enough, or if you watch enough videos, like there is kind of a timing that you can use that you can roughly anticipate when it's going to happen. And you've got a 10-second window that you can hit. So like if you practice enough and if you're good enough, like you can actually like pre-cast your Berserker Rage. Because like Neff, for instance, casts his about like when I pattern it out, it's actually about every 25 seconds. Like if you stance to hit Berserker Rage when he does the cast bar, you'll be fine. But there's a short window where he can actually cast it again before your cooldown is up.
Yep, and where I was going with the RNG though was the actual Tremor Totem. That's the piece. So yeah, both sides can stance appropriately, but if it comes down to needing that Fear Ward versus the Tremor Totem, the Horde side's just dealing with RNG on that. So, or somebody that's really, really, really freaking good at timing. But
I mean, and there's a lot to be said on that front as well.
Yep. All right, so we've I think we're about 45 minutes in, and I think we have done an excellent job of getting you guys a bit of a teaser and then some of how these guys feel about the differences between their Alliance and Horde compositions. And a lot of the whys. I do have a kickball question, though. You're the captain of the team. You guys are the kickball captains. You're about to choose your team. Do you go A, for the right healers, B, for the right tanks, and C is just a gimme because nobody's picking that? You're not picking your DPS first. Abram.
Okay.
Like, do you mean in terms of if I have if I'm doing a draft, I draft this position first?
Yes, that is exactly what I'm asking. If you're doing a draft, are we going healers first? You're on, like I said, you're on the kickball team. You're drafting. Yeah, let's go with the draft. You going healers or tanks first?
Am I like a manager for this raid, or am I also a member on it? You know what? I'll be a manager for this raid so that we're truly picking first.
Okay. This is just a fun question I just thought of. So
first thing I do, I log on my level 60 priest. Okay. Then I cast mind vision on Imtar so I can see exactly what he's thinking. I then identify all of the people that he wants and I pick them for my team so that he gets screwed. No,
well played, sir. Well played.
No. So genuinely,
if you mind vision me, you're gonna see a dartboard. So screw you.
He's got a dartboard. There's like a Thunder Fury in the middle. There's some shaman like around.
Somebody said Thunder Fury.
Just throw him. Give me the Thunder Fury. Give me the Wind Fury. Okay, so genuinely, if I'm picking first, the most impactful person for your raid is a good tank. Like that is the first thing. Now, I pick one good tank, and then I pick good healers. And by good healers, I mean like they know how to play, they enjoy healing, and they're also nice people. And by
Right.
nice, I mean like genuinely just good people that are sort of agreeable. Because if
Right.
anybody has done any raiding before, or if you haven't, healers will be the butt end of every argument and conversation
Yep.
and wipe that you have. It will always be the healer's fault.
Yep.
You will never find the DPS that will be like, "Oh, well, it's definitely not my fault."
Yep, and hold that thought, because that was, I actually wrote a note to ask you guys at the end of your whys for
So
raid comp.
I'm picking a tank, and then
Next
if
healer
if
available.
we're doing this fantasy draft style, I'm picking like 3 good healers. Then I'm grabbing what like best DPS that I can, and then I'm just sort of cycling through at
Gotcha.
that point. But
Imtar, any arguments with that? Any rebuts to that?
I actually fully agree
Okay.
with Abram on this point. Like if I'm doing a draft, the first position I'm drafting is my tank, and like just like Abram said, and I want to underline it, like a lot of people joke about, like there's a lot of jokes about like main tank prio on loot and tanks being prima donnas, but like the simple fact of the matter is that a good tank versus a bad tank, or even versus a great tank, like there's a lot of little subtle things that a tank can do that make the difference between how successful your raid is. And like you absolutely need someone who's there every week, who's reliable, who knows how to communicate, who has a calm temperament, who like is just straight up the best player you can get. Because more than any other position, the tank is going to have the biggest impact on whether or not your raid is going to succeed. And that's not to say that other classes don't matter, but in terms of like a singular position, it's the position that is most likely going to impact it. The corollary to that is if you have a bad tank, like a single healer making a mistake does not always or even usually like wipe the raid. The raid can make up for it.
Right.
If a tank makes a mistake, like they forget their Oni cloak, or even a lot more subtle
yeah,
things than
forgetting
that.
body cloak. Who would ever do such a thing?
Yeah, who would do that,
such a
Abram?
thing?
But if your tank makes a mistake like that, that can and will like directly lead to a wipe. So like,
Gotcha.
tank gets drafted first, then I'm picking a couple healers, and I agree with Abram's point that like your healers need to be saints in like they're willing to, be patient with people in addition to being good at the game, because like so much is going to fall on them, and everything is, you know, barely or not, they
Yep.
eat a lot of blame from people who don't actually play healers and don't fully understand like the timing involved. And
Yep.
then after that, I'm just drafting best player at position.
Gotcha. So there's a common theme here that I just want to point out, okay? And Imtar and Abram and I have mutually agreed several times that why we do what we do, why I do what I do, why they're so involved in the war effort, why they're so willing to sit here and talk with us is making the game playable and enjoyable for as many people as you can, right? So the common theme that I've already noticed in our conversation here, and I even made a note of it, Abram started it out. It's important that your key classes, and I wrote it just like this, it's important that the key classes enjoy playing that class. It just is, right? There's nothing worse than your key class being somebody who rolled it because you needed it.
Agreed.
No,
No
nothing
ifs,
will
ands,
have
or
a
buts on that.
yeah, nothing in your raid will have a bigger impact on performance than people enjoying playing. Like,
'Cause
legitimately, it's the most
Like
important thing.
there are like for the long-term health of the player and of the raid, like you have to have players who enjoy playing that class.
Yep.
Like it's great to have people that are willing to play whatever the group needs, but like if they don't actually enjoy what they're doing, they're going to burn out, and classic is a marathon, not a
Yep.
sprint.
Yep.
I mean, you also have like I've also heard stories like plenty of times about people like, your guild gets its first Thunder Fury. You don't know who to go second, and all of your Fury warriors are like, "Yeah, I'll tank for a Thunder Fury," or
Right.
or like there's equivalent item there's equivalents for this scenario where it's like, yeah, I will do this in exchange for such and such. Like one of the things we dealt with in After Party is that we needed somebody to use Nightfall to apply a certain debuff to the boss, and we had someone who, was more than happy to do it, but didn't really enjoy it. And then, a few months later, they're close to burned out because they never spoke up about how much they didn't enjoy it.
Right, right.
You need to pay attention to like the mental health and like the enjoyment level of your players in addition to just like what function they're filling.
Exactly. Agreed. I think we're all agreed on that. I don't think there's any argument. There can't be any argument on that. And just in general, just in general, it's about enjoying the game. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So that's just a thing. It just has to be. Okay, a little bit of a transition here. I gave you guys a list of what we're going to discuss. Let's go add-ons first because I was just thinking about it and you were talking about it, and let's just touch on it really quick. Three add-ons that you would say minimum, Abram, that you would want your folks, types of add-ons that you would want them to have in your raid, and let's just leave it at that.
All right, well, two are off the table already because these are literally like must-haves if you want to play any modicum of seriously. So the first one is some sort of boss mod. Everybody I think uses deadly boss mods. There are others. I think on retail, right? Everybody uses bigwigs nowadays.
Okay.
But some sort of boss mod. It's not required like in every sense of the word, but like, oh my God, why wouldn't you? It just makes your life so much easier. It's gonna track. It's gonna track like everything you need, and like I would almost say it's completely required for things like it tracks wing buffet timers for the dragons in BWL, and like that's a mechanic that you have to consider. And I don't even know how guilds played without add-ons before that. So
right,
deadly boss mods, some sort of boss mod, yeah, required. All right, second one that's required. I'm gonna say this kind of tongue-in-cheek because I know this is a soft spot for Horde. Is a threat meter.
Yep.
but you have salvation, your alliance. Yeah, I'm aware. Ask any of our raiders from last Friday raid how important, or sorry, from our alt raid on Monday, how important salve is.
True though.
True.
It is critically important, and that's also a skill. The same way that like there are. We don't have to get into this right now. Like there are so many skills to learn as a WoW player that don't involve actually pushing your buttons, that like if you have these skills, you will actually be so much more useful to your raid than anybody who knows how to play their class better than you. And one of them is actually knowing, like, not only having the wherewithal to read your threat meter, but also just knowing how to interpret the information on your threat meter.
How to process that data.
Yes. How do you know in real time? Oh yeah, I'm sixth on my threat meter. Like we had a wipe on Veil on Monday in our alt raid. I'll just say this because somebody was like fifth on their threat meter, and then they hit like 2 execute crits in a row, and boom, they're at the top of the threat meter, and they're like, oh well, so where was my salve buff? But at the same time, me having played Horde before, I look at myself in that same situation. It's like, okay, I would have probably known if I see myself anywhere on the threat meter within a relative percentage of the tank, 85, 90%, I'm probably not hitting execute on a fight like Veil, because like boom, instantly you're at the top, and then you pull aggro, and then
everybody dies. Yep.
So threat meter is like so critically important, especially if you're Horde. But even as Alliance, it should be a thing that you're intimately familiar with. You should know how to read it. You should be practiced at reading it. It should just be part of your, like, every 3 seconds, you're like checking your buttons. You're checking. I mean, you don't even have to check your buttons if you've played your class for that long. But like, you're checking around your feet. You're checking your threat meter. You're checking your feet. You're checking your threat meter. And it's just like.
So what about your third one then, buddy? What about your third one?
So third one,
is there even a third one that's necessary? I guess would be
I would
better
say,
question.
I would say raid frames. I would say unit frames. Those are options that people use, but like a big difference again between classic and vanilla. We're playing on an updated client on old server technology. The Blizzard default raid frames
Suck.
are great.
Horrible. No,
No,
they're
you
horrible.
can make them, the default raid frames, you can make them so good.
Okay.
So good. You have to
Alright.
play with them a little
they're
bit.
yeah,
You do
they're
have to play with
serviceable.
them a little bit, but they are 100% service. I like to play minimally, right? Like I don't use a bar add-on. I don't use a unit frame add-on because you can move the unit frames too. If you're not in the practice of doing that, I would strongly suggest move your unit frame from the top left corner, move it somewhere in the middle below your character. I have mine to the left of my character, my target to the right of my character, somewhere that like all of your important information, you can see it in one spot because that will just improve your situational awareness.
All right.
I know what I'll say for third add-on. Third add-on, it's a thing called Heal Com. It will show you.
We're going to give an assist to Nathaniel Caldwell on that one.
Yeah.
That's assist to Nathaniel. There you go, Abram. Had to give some creds there.
Most definitely. So I could have just pulled the list of like the 6 required add-ons I have for raiding, but I'm talking like that. Those are required for like my guild, right?
Yep.
But HealCom will make your life so much easier. Especially, I learned how to heal on my priest so much faster by utilizing an add-on like HealCom.
Yep.
It will estimate basically how much healing the currently queued up heal is going to do, and then it will display that on the unit frame as like an additional part of the health bar.
Gotcha.
So you can see while you are healing someone about how much that's going to heal them, and it just helps you plan out your next steps as a healer. If you've ever done if you're not a healer, if you've ever done the triage quest for your band-aids to get your bandage skill up, like that's kind of the way that you have to heal sometimes, especially in dungeons.
If I could add one point to that about the importance of HealCom is that like HealCom also doesn't just benefit you, it benefits for everyone else who's in the raid as well, because like and this is kind of like a bit more deep of a topic, but like it sounds simple, but like when you are in a dungeon or when you are in like a dungeon, your healers are playing solo. They are responsible for whatever happens. When you are in a raid, no one healer can carry the raid in any shape or form. You have to heal as part of a team. And that's like, there's a lot that can be said on that topic. But for the purposes of add-ons, HealCom allows healers to communicate and see on their raid frames who is healing what. So like if your cast is 50% done, 60% done, and you're thinking about, okay, who am I healing next? Having heal comms already out allows you to see, oh, this guy's really low. Oh, but a bunch of people already have heals queued on them. So I'm going to heal this other guy.
Yep, you're not going to overheal.
And you're also not going to waste output either.
Yep. Very nice. So then we're agreed on our top 3. We don't even need to debate that any further, I don't think.
Well, there is one other add-on that I would throw out there as like...
Of course. No, go for it.
So this is probably not as important as a heal comm. I'd agree with you on the first 2. But there's an add-on that I would swear by called Classic Loot Assistant. And basically, it's just a huge convenience thing for your raid. Like what it'll do is that among its other functions, like for your raid leaders, you have a couple slash commands, and you can see who has Aqua Quintessence in the raid. You can see who has Oni cloaks. You can see who has them equipped. It'll tell you who has. It'll tell you who has sand for Blackwing Lair. So you can check to see, oh, do all of my tanks and healers have sand? Okay, good. It'll also, like, for anyone who's heard the phrase loot the hounds, it'll automatically whisper whoever's loot it is that it's their turn to loot the hounds, so that like your issues with yelling at your raid to loot the hound disappear. Basically.
Wow. So that sounds like an efficiency right there. All right, let's loot the dog. Yeah, that's a common theme that I've heard. So let's let Imtar lead off then. I'm assuming these are going to be the same, but Abram, if you have like an addition based on faction, Imtar, give us the raid consumables. Let's go with the MC first, and then work your way up real quick. Your required consumables that you couldn't do without minimums.
Today or February?
Let's go with February because we're dealing with hopefully a lot of new folks to the raiding scene and trying to inform them.
Okay. So, what I would recommend is that like there are standard consumables you're gonna want. Like this is also gonna vary by class.
Mhm.
For your melee, you're pretty much all of your melee and your hunters are gonna be running a mongoose potion. You're gonna be running um you're also going to be running Juju, which you get up in Winter Spring. Hunters not so much, but the Juju is a 30 strength buff. For all of the melee now, they're all using for their food is going to be the smoked desert dumplings, which is 20 strength. You can also replace the Juju with Elixir of Giants, but honestly, like, why would you? The Juju is just better and also like easier to obtain for the most part.
Okay.
Um, the
I'm furiously
the-
writing this down, by the way, because I use giants like it's my
Yep.
job.
One of the other more hidden consumables that you're gonna want is for they actually come from the blasted lands. For your melee, you're gonna want roids. This is a unique consumable, so you only get one go at it. It lasts an hour. Uh, roids are 25 strength, which last an hour, and there's a agility version as well, which your rogues and your hunters can use.
Round Scorpok Assay.
Yep. So you're going to want to be packing that. And I mean, the rest of your consumables are kind of odds and ends. But those are going to be like the ones that are going to do the most work for your melee. Uh, if you're a tank, you're actually going to use all of those same ones. But you're going to also be using a superior defense elixir, which is 500 armor. And I know, like, for a lot of people, armor is a very opaque subject. Like, they know having more armor means less damage taken, but like the math behind how much is kind of sketchy.
Mhm.
500 armor is a significant deal. Uh, and something that's worth about armor is that like there's some areas of the community that believe like, oh well, I've got 10,000 armor, so why do I need to push for 11,000? Uh, the armor math is actually set up such that every increase in armor, like every 500 armor, is actually the same value in terms of your time to live equation. So like you actually never stop stacking armor. It's always something you're going to stack. There is no I get to this much and then it stops mattering. Uh like, and the armor is also like the one stat you have aside from health that always works for damage reduction. So you do want to stick with that potion. It's kind of like a quiet thing, but like you're definitely going to want it. The other potion that like I swear by, that actually makes a lot of difference. Um, I'll start with sharpening stones. For your offhand as a tank, and also for warriors. Rogues will use poisons on their offhand, but warriors will use a sharpening stone. The elemental one is 2% crit. Your other option is not as good, but it just increases damage that the weapon deals by 8. That is modified by crits though, and it's modified by your other cooldown. So like it's basically a 8 increase to the base weapon damage. So it's actually slightly better than just a raw like flat +8. So you're going to be running that as a DPS, and you're going to be running one as a tank on your offhand.
Okay.
But where I was going with that is there's another potion, which is the Gift of Arthas.
Yeah,
Which,
I really like that one.
yeah, and Gift of Arthas works in a kind of convoluted way. But what it does is it gives you a buff on your tank who is using the potion that anyone who hits them in melee has a 30% chance, which means against bosses it's always going to be active, to have a disease applied to them that increases damage taken by 8. And
That's
what
by
that is,
everybody.
right, that's by everybody. Like think of it as that one potion is a dense sharpening stone
For
on both
everybody.
the main hand and offhand and the ranged weapons of every player in your raid.
In addition
So,
to their own sharpening stones, right?
correct. In
So
addition to
that's
that.
huge. Huge.
Right. like that, like I know there's some discussion from tanks concerned about buff cap that like it's not worth it, but like it's actually it's actually a very big deal. Uh, like if you figure that that you've got, even if you assume you're running like 15 melee, just as some napkin math, like if you're running 15 melee and they're dual wielding, and their weapon speeds are averaging 2, and they're running a, 30, like even on a 1 minute fight, you're talking uh about 900 attacks, which times 8, you're talking about 7200 damage before crits, and before you factor in the extra amount of hits from abilities. So you're actually factoring in like, tens of thousands of damage over
Yeah.
the course of a fight.
I'm a
It's
That you're
fan of
just
it.
that's just
It's
like
just free
it's free
damage.
damage.
Yeah.
Like it's not a trade-off against anything, it's free damage.
One
Well,
buff slot for
it's
one
a trade-off
tank.
of a buff slot, but like,
For one
yeah,
player, though, right?
it's,
Right.
Yeah. All right. So Imtar, good stuff. Let's let Abram go with the caster side for buffs and any rebut. I don't think he's
Okay.
going to disagree with anything you said.
I actually am a little bit.
Okay.
The first thing that is most important, I am offended that he would say that you don't need a sharpening stone on your main hand. Now, the reason he says offhand is because the Horde get Wind Fury Totem that actually occupies the buff and the consumable on your main hand.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
that's an important point, because like the way weapons are coded is that they have 2 slots on them that are like hidden from the user. They have a permanent slot, which is going to be filled by an enchant, or in the case of like ranged weapons, like a scope, but something that sits on the weapon permanently. And they have one temporary buff slot, and that can be, that can be a sharpening stone. In the Horde's case, it can and pretty much always is Wind Fury. But there's also like for casters, I'm sure you're going to bring up the oils that are coming out soon, and like there's a few other odds and ends like the rogue poisons, but you can only have one of those.
Gotcha. So on the Horde side, Wind Fury, main hand, you don't need the sharpening stone. Is that what I'm gathering? Did I hear that right?
Correct.
same thing
Okay.
with rogues too. Like
Very
they
good
won't-
stuff to know. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, on Alliance, right, you use either poison or sharpening stone
Yep.
on your main hand, but for Horde, you don't have to worry about that. Okay.
Very
Yeah,
good points.
And that's actually kind of a trap for newer players, because like if you apply a sharpening stone or a poison to your main hand and your shaman puts down Wind Fury, you won't get Wind Fury because that slot is already occupied.
Which I think we can agree you won't Wind Fury over any of that.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, I'll let you go.
You're up, Abram.
Sure. So, yeah, the most important consumable that you can possibly obtain is something Imtar didn't even mention, and it's called Savory Deviate Delight. The most important thing you will ever use.
Oh my god, I have 9 of them in my bank. All right.
Well, if you're a human, right? Like, what's the point? But like on my Night Elf Warrior, dude, I drink and or I should say eat Savory Delights like it's nobody's problem. Shout out to Augustus, the master of Savory Deviate Delights.
Actually, if I could butt in one more time on that. Savory Deviate Delight for Alliance is mostly like a cosmetic item.
Yeah.
But for Horde, it
actually
for
has Tauren, it has an actual
Horde,
purpose because it alters the size of your hitbox. Yes.
Yeah, for Horde, it actually has utilitarian purpose because like Tauren have
It's
a larger than normal hitbox. So like, if you use it, it actually lowers your hitbox size, which if you're a tank actually matters for boss positioning.
Mm-hmm.
And it also matters as a DPS if you're trying to avoid some area effects.
That's a good nuance to know. Thank you. That's a very good nuance to know.
That's a slight thing, but and Noggin Fogger works the same way, which of course is the second most important raid consumable. You got to have your Savory Deviates and your Noggin Foggers, because if you're not RPing, like, what's the point?
Right.
Yeah, I would agree almost unilaterally across the board with what Imtar said. I would make the distinction, and I'll talk about this in a second for casters, but we might have a point of contention over the Blasted Lands buff. So for casters though, really you're looking at like 2. So if you're a DPS, right, you're looking at a Flask of Supreme Power. Now flasks, everybody has their different opinion on flasks. I'm of the opinion that for like current content as a tank, if you're in really, really good gear and you have full world buffs and you don't die, you really don't need a flask. It still helps, but I'll be the first to admit that like I don't always flask anymore as a tank, just because it's not always needed, but it certainly will help. A Titan's flask, I mean, for the extra health.
Yeah.
And especially as Alliance, where you get multiplicative bonus on, like, even the world buffs are different for Horde and Alliance, right? Like Kings is a percent stats bonus, and then Zandalar buff is a percent stat bonus on top of that, and they stack if you're Alliance, and if you're Horde, you obviously don't get Kings, so they don't stack. So like, makes a huge difference. But for casters, at least, right, like your mages, your warlocks are pretty much going to feel compelled to get a Supreme Power Flask every raid, just because it is, again, it's free. Well, it's not free, right? But it's extra spell power, and it's your most important stat, right? Spell power. So,
now, can you get away with just an arcane elixir, or?
Well, you use both. That's the thing.
They're in addition to each other.
Oh, nice.
Right,
so they stack. Okay.
So yeah, like all the stuff I listed off for melee, that like you need this and this and this and this. Casters don't really have like a million little things that all add together. They just have the flask.
Gotcha. Okay.
Supreme Power, depending on your raid comp, a lot of times your physical DPS are going to carry the raid anyway. So it's certainly not required. You're not going to wipe if you don't have a flask of Supreme Power, but it makes you so much more, not only like useful, but also competitive.
Makes you not need a boomkin.
Ideally, you have a boomkin.
Yeah,
and
I just threw that in there.
Power and a greater arcane elixir.
Yep.
And a power infusion if your priests feel so inclined. So really, you should, but I'm not going to tell you that like you have to. You're literally useless without a Supreme Power Flask. If you have the ability to get one, you really should. But I typically find most competitive casters, they're all going to get it anyway because they take pride in their play, and they want to be the best versions of themselves that they can be. That's why they're looking up consumables in the first place.
Again, otherwise, what's the point, right?
Right. Yeah. Arcane elixirs, greater arcane elixir specifically. Mage blood potion is an MP5 potion that's available to you, but kind of like Imtar said, at that point your like definite required consumables kind of falls off. There's Night Fen soup, which is more MP5 soup. Not Whipperroot tuber, Rumsey Rum tuber. Does that sound right? The
Rum Tum tuber.
Rum Tum tuber. That's right.
Yeah, Rum Tum tuber.
Rum Tum tuber from Dire Maul that increases your intellect. That's intellect food. That's good to have.
Now, do you guys do like tribute run? Tribute buffs?
All the time.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole other story to get into.
Okay.
But
let's save that one for another day.
The
then.
whole thing.
All right. Let's save that one for another day. I'll write that down.
That's actually an argument for having good hunters, like not necessarily in your raid, but in your guild. Because like a good hunter will solo Dire Maul and then just sit in the instance and
charge people.
And people can just run through and get their buffs, and like it's no trouble clearing Dire Maul North anymore, but like if you've got a hunter who solos it, it's just so much faster and nicer.
Or I'm just going to throw out there, I'm going to put myself out there and be like, or just a good multi-boxer who can just clear it for you and not have to do the hunter thing. I do happen to know a multi-boxer, so
the other two things you like definitely want to get as a caster are and this is where I said the point of contention with the Blasted Lands buff, right? Blasted Lands buffs do not stack with the Zandalar tribe Zanzas that you can pick up, and one of the Zanzas that you can get is a Spirit of Zanza that will give you 50 stamina and 50 stam and 50 spirit. Right. And even though, so like as a priest, that's amazing. 50 is like spirit is already one of your best stats, if not your best stat. Once you hit a certain intellect threshold that you just have enough mana, like spirit will do so much for you. So like 50 spirit, oh god, if you're a tank, 50 stam, like this is amazing.
Well, the casters don't even need the casters don't even need the intellect one from the
No.
from Blasted Lands either, because the mages will do arcane intellect, and like basically the way the game is coded, like you can have one like they're exclusive with each other, and whichever one is bigger wins. So like you can go through the work of getting the intellect buff from Blasted Lands and then have it be overwritten as soon as the mage
Mhm.
casts arcane intellect, which
Right.
is better for you anyway. But like I would definitely agree on the Spirit of Zanzo. Like your tanks should be rocking that, because that's
I,
half a
I,
flask.
So your
I
fact
firmly
checker
believe.
Nathaniel is saying they stack. So
I,
argue that out with your lifeline there.
I mean, so in the days of pre-Zanza, I was always getting the strength and the Agi Blasted Lands buffs. Obviously, there aren't strength and Agi buffs to get anyways. So like that was just. But as soon as like you could get Spirit of Zanza 50 stam, that's the consumable to pick up. It's also 2 hours, right, as opposed to 1 hour for the Blasted Lands buff, and you can have an extra one in your bags to chug when you inevitably go a little too hard and die. But I always make
He
the
said
argument to
inevitably.
my right. I always make the argument to my melee that yes, 25 agi, 25 strength, those are amazing. But that doesn't do you any good if you didn't have the 50 stam that helped you live. So my main
Well, maybe you should draft draft tank at a higher position so they're not shadow flaming the raid.
Hey, I'm just so, especially you know how it is dying on tech packs. Sometimes just like
Oh,
stuff will happen. Like if you're melee, Titan's Flask not required, but certainly useful. And like the Spirit of Zanza, same thought process. Like any more health that you can have so that you don't die. And then part of your worth as like a melee, especially a warrior anyways, is yeah, you might be DPS, but having a shield in your bags to just throw on, taunt a mob that's getting loose makes you so much more useful to your raid than your immediate thought process when a group of mobs come in being like, oh, whirlwind,
Yep.
bloodthirst. No, you should want to go defensive stance, grab something. Hey, I'm picking up this mob and taunt it. But the last thing I will say about casters before we get too derailed, the next phase there are wizard oils coming out.
Okay. Tell us about those.
Yeah, so they're a little expensive in that. So they're made with enchanting, not engineering.
That would be
enchanting.
weird. That would just be weird.
Right? No, they're made with enchanting. They require ZG rep to make, but they're BOE. So like mana oil, for example, you will take 2 large brilliant shards and 3 purple lotus, but you'll make a mana oil with 5 charges, and it gives you 12 MP5 and 25 plus healing for 30 minutes.
they're actually a huge pain in my butt because
because the war effort requires the mats
right,
that you use for
because
them.
the war effort requires Purple Lotus and Fire Bloom,
yep.
which are the 2 mats that
Mhm.
go into those. So
Yep.
like you've got to drag casters into an alley and like pry the Fire Bloom from their cold dead fingers to get it for the war effort.
Right. Hey, listen, you guys, it's amazing. We've already gone an hour and a half, which is what happens every time I talk to you guys, right?
Hey, don't let me forget to plug wizard oil, man. 1% spell crit, 36 spell power. Like that
ridiculous.
That's
ridiculous.
insane. Yeah. So and these are cooldowns that are not cooldowns, but these are consumables that your casters have not had an opportunity to play with. And in the next phase, suddenly they're gonna just become part of the like standard stack for those guys. So like the warlocks and the mages are over the moon.
Yeah, something I would throw out there is like to the flask question is that with regards to flask, like I generally agree that like your casters are probably going to want a flask. Like it shouldn't be required and it generally isn't, but like it makes a noticeable difference to be flasked or not. Melee don't really have an equivalent flask because there isn't like a 100 strength flask or whatnot. There's just a health flask. And your melee probably shouldn't be investing in it, but like one thing I would say, especially to groups that don't have everything like super overgeared or like or may still be progressing, is like if you can, you really should strongly consider flasking your tanks, whether that's like you have to split the cost with, multiple people or like otherwise, because like the flasks make a much bigger difference than you would think. Something I would bring up to new tanks that may not be on the cutting edge of theory crafting. There's a concept in tanking called worst case scenario, and like as an example, like the drakes in like the drakes in Blackwing Lair have the ability to thrash, which means they can hit, like they basically have the Wind Fury buff. Like they can melee attack and then like immediately do like 3 melee attacks all at once.
Okay.
Uh, and what happens is like their worst case scenario is like the maximum amount of damage they can dish out within the window before another heal can land. So like your worst
Got
case
it.
scenario as a tank is that you eat a Shadow Flame breath from that Drake, which will hit you for it'll hit you reasonably for about 3,500, and then you'll get hit by a Thrash, which is an auto attack which does the 2 bonus ones.
Yep.
And those will crit for, again, depending upon your armor, uh like it's not unreasonable that they hit for about like 22 to 2,500 a piece. So if you total all of, like, you're not likely to get back to back crits on them, but like if you figure that they're about 2,000 damage a piece, or like total, like you can throw 6,000 damage from that thrash, as like, again, avoidance factors in and parries and dodges and all of that, but like that's not unreasonable to assume they're gonna like go to about 6k. Then you throw the breath on there, you're talking about like 9,500 damage in the space of a global. And if you've got a tank who, like, your tanks are generally going to be sitting in the 5 to 6 K range in health, totally unbuffed. If you throw flasks, like if you throw world buffs on them and raid consumables and the priest fortitude and all of that, like it's not unreasonable to get them to like 8, 9K. When I actually raid tank in full buffs, I actually am rocking 10, like I'm at 10K health. But the reason that's important and the flask puts me over the top is that even though it's only 1,200 health, it can push your tank over what the boss's like worst case scenario
Right.
damage burst is. And that means like it's not just 12k health. It actually can be the difference of like having a small chance of your tank gets one shot versus there's no chance of your tank gets one shot. And that's
Yes.
actually a much bigger survivability difference
Yeah.
than you give credit for initially.
So just
like,
like everything else, it's maths, right? So you're
right.
going into a specific raid and know, all right, this is the maximum I could quite possibly take. I need to be prepared for it. All right, I'm going to get the last word on that one. Let's transition here real quick because, like I said, we got about a half hour. I think we got to get some Q&A from the audience too. Guys, we've had 17, 18 folks the entire time listening to this, which is awesome. And so let me just shamelessly plug. Make sure you hit the like button there. Subscribe to the channel. Let us know if we should keep doing these. I'm going to keep doing these, but I'd like to see that like button, right? So we know that we're entertaining you. Let me transition. And now that I think about it, this is going to go hand in hand. The differences in rating between vanilla and classic and how technology has changed the game, I feel like are going to be hand-in-hand topics. I think that Abram might end up being a little bit young for this one.
Yo, hold on a second there.
So I'm gonna let him.
Don't be ageist, Banner.
No,
Hey.
I'm gonna let Imtar go first, though.
I'll have you know, my Windows 99 computer played Age of Empires just fine. Okay.
Oh, and we can all appreciate some Age of Empires, dude. Still got the discs, I think. Anyway, yeah, no, all right, I'm joking. Abram, go first. How you feel? What the rating, from your perspective, the difference between rating and vanilla and now classic.
Okay.
Try to avoid the cliches, right? We all know that nobody remembers the shit that happened back then correctly. The maths are different that people remember. And then lead into how technology has changed it for you too. And then we'll let Imtar close.
Sure. So I'm going to touch on 3 main points that I see as huge differences to why like you really can't get that hashtag no changes thing going.
Yep.
All right. First big change. Back in my day, you at any time, like Twin Emperors is 2 bosses, right? It's 2 bosses at once.
Mhm.
And you would think that fighting 2 bosses is hard, and you'd be correct. In the days of 2005, when AQ first came out, Twin Imps was actually 3 bosses. There was Vecnalash, there was Veclor, and then there was Latency. Like the
Right. Yep.
the lag boss and the lag monster was a thing that everyone dealt with. Like everybody having, solid, reliable cable internet was certainly not a guarantee. Like
Yep.
I'm sure there are people who attempted to raid on dial-up. I have no idea how that worked,
Oh,
but
God.
maybe they did. Maybe I'm, confusing times, but I feel like it can't have been that much later after.
Dude, let me tell you about the Aussie that used to raid with us back in vanilla.
Right. Let's.
And so that's one thing, right? Like the internet and,
Mhm.
and your internet connection just innately creates extra issues.
Yep.
The second thing that I know you and I talked about, everybody now, I say everybody, a lot of people now play on like 27-inch monitors, 32-inch monitors,
Lots of real
35-inch
estate.
monitors on extremely like small resolutions, and their UIs are very optimized
Response
to
times.
reduce clutter.
Yep.
And so they see so much more of what's going on versus back in the day, you were playing on like, a 12-inch toaster.
Yep.
And so you just couldn't see as much. And like, you could not be your situational awareness was necessarily hampered. So I think that is in general just increased everybody's SA a little bit.
Would it be fair to lump in with that now that we're playing on the same client that you can crank your video up to 10 and see everything?
And turn your UI scale down. Yeah, most definitely.
Yep.
So those are 2 ways that I see it huge. And then a third way that actually has nothing to do with the game itself is the fact that Discord exists. And I'll the way that allows you to communicate and coordinate with your guild outside of everybody being online. There was a time where, if it was raid time and if somebody didn't log on, you had no idea where they were. Versus now they can send you a Discord message. Hey man, I'm stuck at work. I'm not going to be able to make raid. Oh, no problem. And then you find a sub for them. But,
can somebody get to a payphone and see if so-and-so is alive?
And we use it for world boss tracking, which I assume is where Imtar was about to go with that. Am I correct?
I was actually gonna go in a slightly different direction, but Discord existing is a big deal. Something that used to happen that like now is only for like the like really crazy guilds is that like every guild used to have a website. And it was always like these page front or like these cookie cutter like template guild sites, but it was like you had it because it was the only way to like convey information. Like you had here's the sign up, here's the announcements, here's our requirements and our rules, because like there existed nowhere to post them. And like it was cumbersome, it was awful, it wasn't easy, it wasn't intuitive, it was a pain in the butt to get people to check them.
Guild forums, oh my god.
You had guild forums as a method of communication. Like they accomplished the same, like Discord technically accomplishes all of the same purposes, but like it did it better than that solution ever did. The other thing I would throw out there is that like there was a way you could scour people, like scrounge people up for world bosses and get a hold of people. Like I played EverQuest and we had a phone tree.
Yeah, I was about to say Imtar. I had a buddy who was in who was in the top Horde guild on the server I played on, and they had a legitimate phone tree starting from the
Right.
guild master, going to the officers, and then splitting by twos until everybody in the guild had been called. And if it was 2 a.m. and the world boss spawned and you got a call on your phone, man, you
What do you
better
do
log
though?
in.
What do you do if
Low-
your grandma is on a party line and you can't like get her off of it back
Well,
then?
what's
No.
worse is like when you try to call like your inner ring of officers, and like a couple people earlier in the tree just like aren't picking up
Right,
their phones,
right.
and or you can't get a hold of them because people didn't have cell phones back then or either. Like cell phones were a new thing
Right.
in the
Yep.
in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yep.
Like
Agreed.
so
It
like
was
you're calling their
the thing.
landline. So like if they're out and about, you can't even get a hold of them on the
Right.
phone tree.
Right.
So now you've got to figure out, okay, this person's removed from the
Mhm.
phone tree, so who's, like you had to have evolving phone trees, and like good luck with that.
Yep. Oh,
like,
nice.
That's something else to consider. But like since Abram did his 3, something I'd throw out there that like he didn't touch on, but like I'd like to circle back to a point earlier.
Okay.
Threat meters. Like
Oh, yeah,
100%.
Oh,
Like,
that was a
if you
given, I
watch-
think. That was number 2.
Right.
Okay.
But like if you watch the old kill videos like World First and whatnot, like there's a lot of time in the videos where the DPS are just like they'll DPS for a while and they stop and they twiddle their thumbs. And like they don't do they just aren't doing damage. And the reason for that is like people talk about like how low DPS was back then, and to some extent it's because of like changes in the game itself, but to a big extent like threat meters are that, because like you could not afford to pull threat, which meant like and you had no idea how much threat was out there, so you had to play conservatively.
Yep.
So like even if you were theoretically capable of X amount of damage, you were only really doing like half of that, especially because the meta back then was your tank needs to wear full mitigation gear always.
So I see where you're going with this, Imtar, and I mistook where you were going with it. So there wasn't much of a threat meter back then. Is that kind of what we're saying? So that's a huge difference now. Is that the
Threat meters never existed
Gotcha.
in the game until like Blizzard didn't make threat meters like part of the retail interface until several expansions in. I don't remember
They-
exactly when.
They
Gotcha.
existed, but the key thing is nobody knew exactly how much like the best threat meters available were at best little like estimators, and sometimes
Gotcha.
they were kind of
Right.
accurate, but
Like-
they were not exact.
Gotcha.
Right. Like Blizzard never came out and said this is the threat values of certain abilities. Like Sunder Armor, for instance, has on the tooltip it says deals a high amount of threat. Well, how much? Players had to test that to figure it out and then code it into the add-on. And you were
Right.
mostly like you were within ballpark accurate, but not necessarily exact.
And there were
Multiple bosses had threat drops too, which is something
Yeah.
that we deal with now. And like
Well, let's
players had to try to figure that out.
just
like-
say that if they were totally accurate back then, you would still be dealing with latency and getting
Right,
that
Oh, sure.
return, right? So that it may not have even mattered if they were the most accurate they could be with that latency boss.
Well, like
Mhm.
no one part of it, right, is like you point to that and you're like, oh well, that's the reason why everybody is so much better now, why the rating is so different. It's like cumulatively that it's a million different things
Yep.
that have now added up, and so many like lower latency feeds onto better add-ons, feeds on like they all mutually support
Right.
each other,
Yeah.
and then you start to see bigger returns from all of them collectively.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, it's the cumulative experience of all of those. And like,
Mhm.
before, like, people complain nowadays about like spell batching and how that's so awful, but like, it existed in Classic and like it was there for a reason, and it was to combat latency for exactly this. Like, I mean, even to the point about latency, like, you can't underestimate it because like, flag this one for later, but in Naxxramas there's a boss called Hygen the Unclean, and like the one and only important mechanic in that fight is about every minute or minute and a half, whatever the timer was, he would teleport to like an odd part to a certain part of the room, and there was like basically like he'd blast the room with like absurd amounts of poison damage, and there was a moving safe zone that you had to follow. And like world class guilds could not kill that boss, even though like the only mechanic is follow the safe zone, because latency meant that like you didn't actually know where the safe zone was based on like how much latency you had.
Oh god, that would be painful. That would be really painful.
Like
Wow.
like I mentioned like having an Aussie that we played with, and like when like we never our guild never actually did Heigen. Like we just weren't that good. But like I know guilds that did, and like if you were a foreigner trying to play, like you basically just like were dead weight on that fight, because as soon as that first phase came up, like you're trying to do it on 10 seconds of latency, 8 seconds of latency. You don't even know that the fight is up or that phase has started, and you're already dead.
Right. So then we can agree. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Technology has definitely changed the game, and for the better,
sure.
I would say. I don't want to get into a deep discussion. We're about out of time, but I just want to kind of tease this, and that is, and we talked about this. I'm really not a fan of them baking in the gosh, I just went blank. Baking in the spell batching.
Spell batching, yeah.
I'm not a fan of that. I know that both of you had varying opinions. I feel like we'll talk about that another day. But that, like it or love it, hate it, whatever, spell batching was a thing back then. I feel like it's better now, or depending on your perspective, it's different now. So that would be another big thing I think that has changed, just from my opinion, from back then to now. All right, guys, we are at an hour, 42 minutes. First of all, I'm going to cleverly try and commit Imtar to more sessions here. Because I want to tease something real quick. I would really like to get into, and not an in-depth for each one, but an hour-long session of how you handle each raid, MC, ZG, BWL, and then obviously by the time we talk next, AQ 40, AQ 20, they'll be around the corner, right? AQ 40 next. Gosh, do they both come out in phase 5, or is one staggered to phase 6?
They both
once
come
the
out
gates
together.
release,
Okay.
they're both available.
All right, so I'd like to tease, I'd love to have a discussion on that. Obviously the emphasis will be on the AQs for you guys, because that'll be the most recent topic for you. But I'd really like to get into that. And then another thing I would really like to get your opinion. I'm going to ask a yes or no question here of both of you. All right, yes or no only, please. Are you looking forward to TBC or not? Abram, yes, no.
Yes.
Imtar, yes, no.
Yes.
Okay, so
I changed my answer to no to disagree with Imtar.
So I would love to, down the road, if it's in the cards, have a conversation with you raid leaders on TBC and your thoughts, kind of a teaser for when it's coming out and such. So with that being said, we've had, like I said, 16 to 20 folks in the audience during the entire podcast. We're going to open it up for some questions, and we'll banter back and forth while we're waiting on the questions. But please ask a question or two of Imtar or Abram, and we'll throw it on the table. We're going to do it for about 17 minutes and call it a wrap at about 10 o'clock.
I will answer the question that I know has been on everyone's mind.
Okay.
Why is Boomkin the greatest class, and why should you have one in every group in your raid? And the answer is because they are just so fluffy. 3% crit buff, arcane damage. What's not to like? Get yourself a Boomkin.
Yeah. Don't you doubt that our producers are going to find that clip of you, whatever that was that you did. I don't even know what to call it. But
I'm going to agree. Boomkins are great, and I think Risen should bring 30 Boomkins when they do progression in AQ 40.
If it was a thing, I would do it.
Okay, so here we go. Brain Soup has started with a great question. You guys said a lot about high-end rating. What one thing would you recommend to a group of players just breaking into rating? Imtar, go. Abram, you're next.
The first thing I would do is define your goals. because like
Okay.
with high end, it sounds very simple, but like this is what I feel like matters quite a bit in like retail, in like guilds that are just getting in. Like you need your players to be roughly on the same page in what they're seeking. Because like if they are seeking like to turn their guild into a high end rating experience, and then but like 3/4 of your guild does not feel that way, you're going to have some instability and you may end up with players leaving.
Yep.
If players just want to see the content and everyone agrees on that, that's fine. The other thing you see a lot of is guilds where, and this kind of leans on the first point, is uh, there's a lot of times where you'll hear stories about guilds where there's 10 or 15 people that really put in the effort and they feel upset that they're carrying the raid from, the other 25 people that don't really care or don't know what they're doing or don't look up, their class and all of that. And, there's legit reasons about like some people don't play this game to, they're not really concerned about progression. And, that's fine. Like, as much as I'm a high end raider, like, people who play the game socially, like, that is a perfectly valid play style that I will defend. But I will say, like, your guild needs to, like, have a clear purpose for what it is about, or you're going to have down the road tensions between groups that want different things out of raiding.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. You are going to see folks leave if it's not understood. Either you're going hardcore or you're going casual. This game is not a second job for a majority of folks that play it, right?
Exactly.
So find like-minded folks, hang with them, and have a common goal in mind. Very well put, Imtar. Abram, rebut, follow-up, agreements.
Definitely agree. Manage expectations and like define expectations is a huge one. I would say don't get so worried about the minutia, right? When you're at the top of rating, that's when you can really start to nitpick. Okay, who's stacking consumables, who's not stacking consumables, who's focus on try to emphasize basic skills, kind of those basic skills I was hinting at that don't require pushing your buttons. Things like, make it a priority. Yeah, we may not have the best DPS or everything, but we are not going to butt pull anything, or we're not going to, die to any mechanics that are avoidable. Like, focus on the building blocks, because a lot of times, people will develop skill at their class over time a lot more easily than they will develop skill at some of the more fundamental game mechanics. Sometimes they're just not familiar with them.
Yep.
So don't focus so much on the minutia. Focus on broad strokes, things that are attainable. And to that end, make sure that you, especially if you're a newer guild getting into raiding, identify a raid leader that will motivate people, that they want to play with, and to an extent kind of for that person, because they are sort of the raid boss, if you will. Identify someone who's going to be motivating, who's going to foster that environment that lines up with those goals, kind of like Imtar said, and someone that like almost overly communicates, right? Especially in a newer guild or a newer rating scene where people are
timid, tentative, nervous.
yeah, well, exactly. They're nervous. They're not
Yep.
exactly having someone there to be like, hey guys, it's not really that hard. Focus on these couple of things, and let's see how it goes.
Yeah, so I'm gonna
And
throw my 2 cents in here on you, Abram.
Sure.
One, there are obvious DPS races, right? There are obvious bosses that are DPS races. But short of that, I'll take execution and a willingness to listen every time, right?
Yeah, like I'll join in and lay down the marker that like 40 naked characters killed Onyxia. Like, there is no content in this game right now that is unclearable with, characters that do not have consumables and like do not have world buffs.
Yep.
Like, characters just like in their base forms are able to clear this content right now. Like those things, like those buffs and all of that, like absolutely 100% help, and it's, you know, they're going to make a difference. But at the end of the day, like execution and good play and good communication matter much more than raw stats.
Yep. Obviously, the one caveat is obvious DPS races, but do we really have any of those yet? Do we
Fail,
really
that's
have
it.
any? Yeah.
Fail.
Okay. All right. Good stuff. So Brain Soup asked another one. I feel like this is going to take us right up to the top of the hour because nobody else is asking questions. We're going to have to fix that for the next podcast. What loot system is best and why?
Oh, this is a great one to get into because
You got 10 minutes and you got to give Imtar some time.
Imtar and I actually use different loot systems. I'll let him take point on this one.
Okay. All right.
So this is going to be a little bit long-winded. I'll try to make sure there's space for Abram here. And
Okay.
keep it succinct.
And give me some time to wrap up.
this actually goes back to my answer, but this actually like builds off of my answer in the previous question of define your goals. Because like the answer to what is the best loot system is like what is the best spaghetti sauce. It depends on the tastes and
well,
like,
Italian, of course. But anyway.
But the or like what toppings on pizza.
Yep.
Like I would say that like because like for instance loot council often gets brought up as like there's the issues of corruption around it, but like in its pure form it's about like trying to give gear out to places where it's going to most benefit the raid and like try to maximize the raid's performance, and you're using like an executive council to try to make those decisions, you know. And I'm going to put aside concerns about stability and corruption and perception of corruption to say that, which are things that guilds that use that system have to like make sure there's reasonable concerns about. But like when you're in high-end raiding, one of the things you can ask of your players is that like there's a certain amount of like sublimation of your personal interest to the welfare of the group that it's fairly easy to ask for. And that also gets easier as your group gets smaller, as like in later expansions, like asking 25 people or 10 people to say like, you know, put aside wanting this item, you can get the next one, it should go to this person because biggest upgrade. Like, you know, you can ask people in those situations to like make a sacrifice, to like sacrifice their self-interest and the item they want for the performance gain of the group. In 40 mans though, and in less competitive groups, that's not always something you can ask. And like it also becomes so like that's something to keep in mind. Like many groups will be just fine with like especially like more like less hardcore guilds are just fine by doing just like an open role system, because if you kill the boss every week, you know, your players are sooner or later mostly going to get what they, you know, what they want just by like dint of having enough roles.
With a little patience. Yep.
With patience. Like that system can be fine because like if you've got 4 healers that are all rolling on, you know, one particular Locomir or whatnot, if all of them are good healers and they're all coming back every week, it really doesn't matter at the highest level who gets it, because somebody in your raid now has a Locomir, and that's a performance gain for your entire group.
Yep.
But like I'm not a fan of DKP. I think like there's reasons that it's kind of an antiquated system. It has real problems in terms of like bringing new people in, and in terms of like needing to be wiped, and in terms of administration.
Yep.
The loot system that my guild runs is actually like a modified EPGP system, and I'm actually a huge fan of EPGP. I'm not going to break it down right now. Suffice it to say that it's a points-based system that balances your effort put in, your EP, against your gear acquired, your GP. and it uses that to try to balance out like who has the highest effort to reward ratio. And it basically is like a fancy pants way of doing a round robin system that has you can use to do different weights. Like I'm a huge fan of that, but I recognize that like that is also not the best system for everyone. But like to circle all the way back and to give Abram some time, I think the best system is going to be don't ask the question what's the best loot system. Ask the question of what are my guilds or what are my raid groups goals, and
Yep.
then based on those goals, that will tell you what your best loot system is.
Yep. Abram.
Yeah, so his main point of it depends is accurate. It's 100% accurate. Your loot system is so many people play the game for loot. I think everybody knows that. You need a loot system that matches what you're trying to do as a guild. That's the most important thing that you can do. So unfortunately, there will never be a good answer to what is the best loot system.
Well, we have the best loot system. It's in retail where they got rid of loot.
Oh, I disagree. I actually think that.
Oh,
okay,
God.
we can't get into that one. We can't get into that one. I personally, I think
All right.
I think the loot drama is like tantamount to classic WoW, and it kills the soul of the game if you get it to
If you remove it. Yep.
Some people love personal loot, and I'm certainly not going to begrudge them too much for that. I will say, kind of the same way that Imtar, like his guild uses a modified round robin that structures itself off of an EPGP format. Our guild sort of uses a structured round robin that takes its base from a loot council system. So the same way that it's like EPGP, effort points, and gear points, our system kind of turns out to be PPGP for like performance points and gear points, right? So typically we make priority lists of just, based on contribution to the guild, their ability to perform, their skill, and then you say this person's going to be first for Locomir, this person's going to be first for Cauterizing Band, this person's going to be first for Elementium Band, but you set them up in such a way that it's not all getting funneled to one person. It's getting spread out.
Yep.
People are taking turns. It's sort of equitable. Well, not sort of. I mean, it strives to be equitable in the number and sort of frequency of people getting loot. And then you just kind of adjust those priority lists as you go. Depending on what drops and in what order, and who gets what loot and everything else. So
I'm going to referee then and go with the best answer, in my opinion. And I think you both agree on it, is whatever works. Whatever's going to work to retain your folks.
I will tell you, if you're in that camp of a brand new guild looking to get into raiding, you've set your expectations. Hey, let's just get in, see some of the content, kill some bosses. Hey, we have that raid leader that's like focused on, hey, let's get through it and let's have fun. I will tell you, the loot system you need to use 100% is probably just roll.
Yep.
Because it's really gear. Maybe like 1% of the player base, their mitigating factor in terms of them playing better is their gear. Almost every single player, you're going to get better results by just playing your character better, which means more research, consumables, world buffs, whatever else you want to put in, and time spent learning and improving your class. That will pay more dividends into your individual performance than any one piece of gear.
That just reinforces Imtar's point that he continues to make. Folks are clearing raids naked. Okay, so it's just a matter of execution, really.
So it is a game. Pick the loot system that matches your goals and allows your group to have fun.
And for God's sake, don't pick your loot rules in the middle of the freaking raid.
Oh, no.
Establish them before you even get to the raiding scene. Establish them.
Pick whatever loot system gives your warriors all of the gear. That's the system you need. Stick with it, pick it, live by it, die by it. You'll never be unhappy.
All right, so we are out of time, but I do want to just food for thought question from Nathaniel. Do you feel the downfall of WoW revolves around the removal of aspects that force creation of a mutually benefiting community? My
I
head,
mean,
my head just
Yes.
freaking exploded. I'm just
The
gonna
The
say,
answer is yes.
I mean, the idea that WoW has had like a supportive community is belayed by the fact that like there's so much toxicity in certain corners.
Oh,
But
and it's
Right.
still there,
but
but
yeah,
the heart and soul of the game has always been like the friends and the community you make along the way. And
and it will continue.
I do think like Blizzard was correct in addressing the fact that like there's only like there is a very tight content funnel in the game in classic and in the Burning Crusade. Like leveling leads to dungeons, dungeons lead to raids, raids are your end game content, and like they were right to like try to do more, I think, to address like individual players as individuals.
hmm
That being said, like I do think like a irrevocable change in the game has been like the fact that it's like classic just seems like it fosters communities, and like you get to know the people on your server, whereas like in retail, like I'm never going to see most of the people I play with ever again.
Right, right.
You know,
Agreed.
like it doesn't have that community feel.
I would agree with that.
I'm not Facebook friends with anyone I played WoW with after Wrath of the Lich King. However, I am Facebook friends with several people that I played with before Wrath of the Lich King.
Yep.
I'll let
Mhm.
that sort of answer the question.
Yep.
So,
And with that, these guys mutually got the last word, guys, for this first podcast. I'm going to call this a success, Abram and Imtar. This was
yeah, I had fun.
amazing.
I mean, you got about 2.5 times as much content as we originally
Oh,
planned.
I did, and I knew that was going to happen. So let me just end the stream with two things. One, the obligatory like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Get the notifications because we are gonna shame Imtar into doing more of these, starting right like 10 seconds ago. But we are going to do more of these. The plan here is to continue down the line with class leads from each of these raiding guilds and have them debate their classes. Hopefully some faction will come into play with why they do certain things that they do, why they spec, what they rely on, etc. I'd love to get some follow-up discussions with these two guys. And they're not going to take any argument from me, or I'm not going to take any argument from them. I don't care how much they've paid for. The Banor Gaming channel is going to dish out 30 days of game time to each one of them, just as a gesture of goodwill and thanks for spending the time today. And they can do whatever they want with those 30 days of game time after that. But Imtar and Abram, you guys are awesome. Appreciate the discussion. Look forward to more and more. And guys, look for us here on YouTube with these podcasts. Appreciate it. Sayonara. See you later. Peace. We're out.
Pleasure being here. Thanks for hosting.